Hello, this is Kenny Williamson, and welcome back to another episode of Melchizedek Chronicles. Today, we're going to be talking just a little bit about a book that I wrote called The Haunting of Virginia Crim, if you can see that there. This book, of course, is available on Amazon. You can find this on my website, truthseekersministry.org, kennywilliamson.com. But, I actually did a podcast about this with a friend of mine. It's been a couple of years ago now. I think we called it the same thing. I can't remember. But this book right here, even though it says A Haunting of Virginia Crim, and it looks like it kind of has a Annabelle doll on it, it's actually a book about demons. And so I kind of want to just go over some of the table of contents of this book and retell the stories. Now, if you want this in depth, you can buy the book. It's pretty cheap, but it's pretty interesting too. This is a true story, and the reason I wanted to do this and put this out is because basically, I have ran across a lot of people, and I've heard of a lot of people, and, they live in a so-called haunted house where they've had ghosts do something to them, or they've seen Bigfoot, they've seen other, shall I say, mythical type creatures, and I don't discount what they say. I believe them. And the reason for that is because I saw Bigfoot myself one time. When I was a kid, I saw Bigfoot looking in my window. And the house where I lived at was, my window was up really, really high. And so for many, many years, I believed in Bigfoot. And I have even been to a Bigfoot conference, where like a Bigfoot thing they put on. And the thing is, what I have come to realize now that I believe is that Bigfoot, like many, many others, and like everything in this book right here, Bigfoot is actually demonic in nature. So Bigfoot is not an actual flesh and blood creature. Okay? And I guess since I'm already on the subject of Bigfoot, I might as well just tell it, because this one is in this book. And let's see here. Which one is that? It is called Bigfoot at My Window. So that story is in here. But just to briefly summarize it like I did, I was laying in bed. I looked up at the window. The bottom part of the window had a curtain on it. The top didn't. And I saw a face looking in, and it had a type of, reddish, glowing-ish eyes with a pale white face and dark hair all the way around, similar to what I look like now, like a Sasquatch. Of course, I don't have red eyes, but, people say I look like Bigfoot. So it scared me to death, and I ran and told my parents, and, they insisted that I was dreaming. It was all a dream. And, of course, that's what my dad said. Oh, it's a dream. You dreamt it. Well, I've had many, many dreams in my life. I'm an old man, more or less. And, dreams, you dream them, you forget them, you go on. This is still in my mind just as the day it happened almost. I mean, it's like burned in. So it's not like a regular dream. But anyway, so after all this has happened, my mom, many, many years later, when I was adult and grown and came back home and was talking to her, she said that a lot of weird things had went on around that house. And she said that, she saw and heard things. And that, for one example, something came in and killed all the chickens. And stuff like that all the time. And, of course, anything can happen, like as far as if you said, oh, well, a fox came in and killed the chickens. Well, it's a really bizarre story, and it's in this book. But, that was just one of the many things. Now, that personally happened to me, and I included it in this book because one of the chapters in this book, I deal with what's called family curses. Okay, and I read a book a long time ago on these family curses, and I've heard people talk about it like, oh yeah, I believe in family curses. So basically, what a family curse supposedly is you have something like, for example, I'll just use myself, a long line of my ancestors, dad, grandfather, great-grandfather, were alcoholics, or at least heavy, heavy drinkers, but I would say alcoholics for the most part. Lots of my uncles, alcoholics. So, somebody told me years ago, you've got a family curse of alcoholism. And I believed them, and I made it a point while I was growing up to never touch alcohol. And there was a couple of times that I did when I was growing up and I was a teenager, and it was just horrible. I got so intoxicated one time growing up as a teenager, I probably really had alcohol poisoning and didn't even know it. Literally, woke up hours later laying underneath a car in a parking lot. Don't really know how I crawled under there. I mean, just totally out of it. So, of course, I don't drink alcohol now, but if you want to drink alcohol, I would advise against it. Now, I know that people say, oh, I can go have a drink here and there, and I guess you can. I'm not saying you can't, but if you have a predisposition to alcoholism or it runs in your family, I would say stay away from it. So I stayed away from it my whole life. I think probably God allowed that to happen to me and literally get alcohol poisoning to where after that, even the thought of drinking some alcohol was just repulsive. Just turned my stomach. So I never did. But I believed it was a family curse. That was my point. And as I wrote in this book, I wrote about family curses, but I don't really believe it's a family curse. I believe it's demonic. I believe what it really is you have demons or devils, as the King James Bible calls them. You have these devils that attach themselves to families, is what I think. So, you go way back and you get a devil that's attached to somebody in your family, and it encourages them or enables them or somehow tricks them into doing some stuff, and they get addicted to it. Well, as this person grows old and dies or whatever, well, this devil, it's still around. This demon, it's floating around out there. So it's like, hey, now I've got this one's son, and it just jumps from family member to family member to family member, and basically haunts, if you will, if you want to use that word, you and your family for generations. And that's what they call generational curses. But I talk about those family curses in here a little bit, just basically what I'm telling you now. And I believe that it's demonic spiritual attacks that happens to you and your family and has been happening. And I got out from under that by getting saved. I don't believe that most of the people in my family that had these problems that they had, I don't believe that they were saved. They never professed to be saved. They never talked about God or Jesus Christ, or they never talked about saving grace or how they got saved, or they were happy they were saved. I mean, nothing. So if a person was to guess, I would guess that they were probably unsaved, and that's probably how these devils are able to basically control them and ruin their lives. So I got saved about 21 years old or so, I think it was. It's in this book. I didn't have any of those problems anymore. Now I have other problems, of course. I'm still a sinner. I'm a saved sinner. But, alcohol and that kind of stuff, anger, which was a big thing of mine prior to getting saved, all that just kind of disappeared. So the next thing in this book here, of course, one of the next chapters is Virginia Crim. That was my mother's maiden name. And it talks a lot about her and her life, how she grew up. You know, they were dirt poor. They actually grew up in Missouri, not very far from Arkansas, so it's just like a centrally located deal here. Talks about her and her life, and I hope she was saved. You know, I tried to make sure she was saved before she died. I asked her, you know, I had to repeat one of those little prayers. You know, the prayers do not save you. I know that. But trying to get her mind thinking about, you know, hopefully she was saved. I just don't know. She said she was. She said, well, I believe in God. I believe in, well, you know, I understand that, Mother, but, you know, the devils believe in God as well. Okay, so a belief in God is not your saving grace. You know. So, anyway, so there's stories about her and her life growing up. And then we have what I call the Crim house, which was the house that they lived in. As she called it, a haunted house. She said the house was haunted. And most of the stories in this book happened at that house. And so one would obviously logically conclude the house is haunted. And of course, you know, it had all the telltale marks of a haunted house. You know, it's back off in the Ozarks of Missouri, in the middle of nowhere, in a little bitty tiny town, way off on a dirt road. Right across the yard is a cemetery. Okay. Down the backyard in the back is a spring, a natural spring down a hill. And, you know, so anytime you've got a cemetery in your yard that's from 300 or 400 years old, and, you know, you live in a house that's basically made out of, well, slabs and old rock, and part of it's got a dirt floor, and, you know, just no heating and air, nothing like that. Had electricity, I guess, but I mean, just dirt poor. Well, come to find out, in this house later on, when it was tore down, they had found pentagrams up in the attic, and a Ouija board up in the attic, and burned candles. So somebody had probably been up there playing around, you know, with the Ouija boards, which is demonic. It's not a toy. I remember when they used to sell them at Toys R Us. They probably still do. And they sold them at Walmart, I think, for a while when I was a kid, as a game. And it's actually not a game. It's demonic. Ask me how I know. I know firsthand. Before I was saved, me and my sister played with an Ouija board, and they do work. And they work really, really well if you're unsaved. And, you know, they like you then. But the only problem is you're dealing with the devil. You're dealing and you're talking to demons, evil spirits. You're not talking to your dead ones, your loved ones. You know, you're not talking to your dearly departed. You're talking to devils. And it becomes painfully obvious whenever they start cussing and calling you names and threatening you. And anyway, make a long story short, we had a Ouija board. It had to be burned. And that was before I got saved. Now, my mother and my sister, I think they kind of played with some of that stuff after I was gone, left the house, and got saved. I think my mother messed around with candles and, you know, burning a different candle for luck, or all kinds of different stuff that's just fake. It doesn't do anything. So she got into psychics for a while, like calling psychics, you know. Bible says to stay away from it. Anyway, so that house she considered haunted. I believe that I guess it probably was, but some of those haunted by demons, but these demons, they followed her when she left. So she grew up and moved away, and they followed her. So they weren't just solely hanging out at that house. They traveled, okay? They travel. So the next one here is a cemetery in the backyard. That was, you know, there's a cemetery back there. It wasn't necessarily anything weird. It was just a regular cemetery. Apparently at one of these cemeteries, it was either this one or another one, there was a couple of little tombs like above the ground. And at one point in time, and that's where the doll came in on here, her and her brothers slid this thing open and looked down inside of it, and there was an old doll in there. And they were scared. And, so basically it was a child's grave, and they had been buried, or at least on top of this thing, under this lid was probably their baby doll, and which is horrible. But, as far as I believe that if it's a child and it's under the age of accountability, they go straight to heaven. So as soon as they die, their body, yes, goes to the grave, but their soul goes immediately to be with the Lord. So anybody that's under the age of accountability goes straight to heaven. So somebody says, oh my gosh, a baby got killed, how horrible. Well, they're in heaven. Okay, so, I know that's what the Bible teaches. King David, he had that problem when he was, him and Bathsheba's child died, and, he was really in mourning and he was really sad. And then when it died, he stopped and said, well, let's get back to work. And I'm paraphrasing, by the way. And basically everybody said, well, why are you fine now? And he said, well, I prayed to God and I was in mourning when to see if the baby would live, and God took the baby and the baby died. So now the baby's in heaven. So I won't see it again until I get to heaven. And he knew he was saved, and he knew he was going to get to heaven, so he knew he would see the baby again. He understood that, okay? So, anyway, so that's where the deal came on the doll. It's not Annabelle. I probably should have put a house on there, a haunted house, but instead this is what happened. So let's see here. And we've got the story in here called The Little Green Man. It's in here. And I did a podcast on that here a while back. I don't have a picture of him handy here. I'd show it to you, but I'm sure you've seen it. One of my other podcasts is called The Little Green Man, just a couple of podcasts ago. The Little Green Man, obviously, Little Green Man, he attacked her, scratched her, folded her around, terrorized her. And from what I've learned from now, other people have seen and heard of the Little Green Man. And, it's pretty interesting. So that story is in here, the original one. And I've got another story, Shadow of the Ape Man is what we call it. And basically, this is a shadow figure that appears as a hunched over primate, if you will. It runs around on the top of the house, or runs around in areas where you can only see its shadow on the ground. And so nobody ever really sees it. When they go to look up where it would be, it's gone. So all they ever see is a shadow. Now, I've seen many, many shows of these haunted shows I used to watch all the time. One of the big things that these people reported seeing were what they called shadow people. And they were lots of times in cemeteries. They would see them go back and forth. They would see their shadows off moonlight or whatever. And they could see figures, but they never saw the people. And of course, most of these people, when I watch these shows, that is, I actually have it on DVD. What I came to the conclusion was 99.9% of every person that they supposedly interviewed that saw this stuff, they all admitted to not being saved and don't even believe in God. So it's no wonder they're seeing demons. They have no protection. They have no protection from the Holy Spirit because they're unsaved. So we've got Shadow of the Ape Man. That's about this shadow figure. The Ape Man returns. I'm trying to remember what that one was. I think I'd have to reread it to figure it out. But that may be the one where it's growling at the door. Anyway, I can't remember. The next one's a silent pair. I called it that, and it's not a pear like as in a piece of fruit. It's a pair as P-A-I-R, like a pair of people. And basically, these were some shadow-looking figures that traveled in pairs, and they would just show up in the house randomly and be standing there looking at you and then disappear. So there's some pretty interesting story on that. My grandpa was involved in that when he was intoxicated and threatened to shoot them. Another one here is the builder at the spring. Now, this particular one has to do with, like I said, they drew water at the bottom of the hill. There was a natural spring, and she said there was always a knocking sound. It sounded like somebody hammering 24 hours a day down there, just constantly hammering. Now, if you went away from the place, it would stop, but when you got to the spring, it started, and it sounded like somebody building. And she said it was just very annoying, got loud, and it was a pecking, knocking, hammering, just constantly. So I named it Builder at the Spring because it sounded like somebody was building something. Pretty interesting story. I don't know if it was the builder at the spring. I think it was, who actually physically pushed my mother into the spring. So some of these devils, they can lay their hands on you at times. Okay, so they're not totally, harmless. I've watched many, many movies in the past, Hollywood movies. But in one of these movies, they're like, oh, that they can't hurt you. They're just like pictures on a page. Well, no, they can hurt you. And they're not pictures on a page. They're real. Okay? So, we got another one here called the colonial scene, is what I call it. And it's basically an apparition of a whole bunch of different people outside having a picnic in a different era. And you can see them laughing and talking and kids playing and this and that. And then you turn your head and go back to look and it's gone. So these things showed up as like a scene you could see. And several people saw it. It wasn't just limited to my mother. Other people saw it and was like, who are these people out here? And then they would disappear. So, I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that. I never have, but it's in the book. Distant headlights. This was another one. Headlights always coming down the driveway when they would think, oh, somebody's coming to see us. Oh, look, there's somebody showing up in a car. And then it gets there, the lights go out, there's nothing there. Constantly seeing headlights. Distant headlights. Now, that reminds me of another one called, which is not in the book, but it's called a spook light. Here up the road in Missouri, there's the thing called a spook light. A friend of mine always tried to get us to go to. And it's basically similar. You're standing there. Of course, I never saw it with my own eyes. He did. But basically, it looks like a distant light, and it gets closer and closer and closer, then disappears. And some people say it's reflection. Some people say it's this. Some people say it's that. Other people claim that the thing showed right up and was like on the hood of their car, and it's an orb, some kind of a floating orb. There are some of those that were around there, too. I don't know if I mentioned it in the book or not, but they probably in the second book, I've got another one that's added on to this with some other people, and there were some orbs in that one, I do believe. Let's see. Another one here is called premonitions. It's more or less my mother having a dream, or she thought she was having a dream of something that happened. And then when she thinks she's woke up, then this thing begins to happen. And it was just terrible. So, like dreams coming true. So I don't know if she had a dream to begin with, or if these things can put thoughts into your head. You have nightmares, and I've always wondered whether or not spiritually, somehow demonically, these things can put thoughts into your head, make you have dreams. I don't know. But either way, however this happened, she either had a dream or thought she had a dream of her own mother, which would be my grandmother, choking her to death, and that dream started to come true, but didn't. If it had I wouldn't be here today. So, anyway, that's a pretty good one. Let's see. The old woman in the closet, that's another one. Another one of these apparitions, like the silent pair. Another one of these will just randomly show up, and this one looked like an old woman, and generally it was always in the closet. So they would go into their closet to get some clothes. They open up the closet. There's an old lady standing there, which is obviously very scary, especially when you're a house by yourself, and there's an old woman standing in your closet, and then she walks out and disappears. So, who likes to have apparitions standing in the house randomly? I mean, I wouldn't want it. So that's one of the stories. We've got another one here called the Demon Bull, which is about a bull that, appeared to be what I think possessed, just overly angry. I have seen movies about, bulls, and I've talked to people about bulls, and some people say bulls are just crazy, and they will attack you and try to kill you if you get in the pen with them. So, that could have been that. Could have been. I included it in here because my mother swore up and down that it wasn't normal, that there was something wrong with this bull, and it would come hunt you down and try to kill you. So, based on the location and all the other things that were happening, went ahead and included it. Yeah, that may or may not be. I mean, I had somebody argue with me about it and say, oh, that's just how bulls are. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, the gray boy down by the spring. That was another apparition, kind of like the old woman in the closet, kind of like the silent pair. Show up as a little boy is what it appeared to be. And he was down there running around playing and would look like one of the kids playing, one of the brothers or sisters. And they're like, hey, get up here, and come to find out it's not a real person. It's an apparition. Okay, we've got another one called the Axeman. That was a pretty good one. It has to do with my father visiting my mother back when they were both young and before they got married. And this axe appeared and, swung at him. And he was freaked out about it, but then later on just said, it's a dream. He totally discounted anything. He said it can't happen. He didn't believe in ghosts. He don't believe in demons. He don't believe in anything. So he saw it, but you know how some people are. You can see something and it can be right in front of your face. And I mean, that's the way it is now. That's the way it is now with people and, in God. They can see a miracle. They can have a miracle and they're like, I don't want to believe it. It's like, you better believe it. No, I don't believe it. Anyway, so we've got quite a few more here. I won't go in depth on them, but one of them is called the Siloam Springs House, and this has to do with these demons following my mother to that house and doing some stuff there. We've got the Sager Creek House. The Sager Creek House is where I saw Bigfoot. So, so this is progressing all the way up until she's got children, my mother, which is me and my sister. And so it started at the Sager Creek House. And then the next one's Bigfoot at my window, which involves what I saw. We've got the Ouija board, which talks about kind of what I already mentioned about the Ouija board. We also have one called the Spaceship, which I think is interesting because my mother did not believe in aliens. Okay, she didn't watch sci-fi movies at all. I'm a sci-fi guy. I like sci-fi. But she looked out her window one day and said she saw a silver cigar-shaped aircraft with portholes, and she could see things in the portholes, and it was setting in the field, and it levitated off, took off. So she saw a spaceship. Okay, so I call it the spaceship. And what I think is interesting now, I may not have put it in the book, but I believe that all of the aliens that people see now are in fact nothing more than devils. All they are is demons. They're spiritual in nature. They're demonic. They are not aliens from outer space. Now, they want you to believe they are. They will show up as that, and our fake news will tell you they're aliens, and our satanic government will tell you they're aliens. And either they believe they're aliens or they're lying to you because they know they're not aliens. Okay? But I've got podcasts about that as well where I believe they're going to use some type of an alien deception in the future to try to cover up people being raptured and cover up stuff like that, and there's going to be some kind of alien appear. Maybe not. I don't know. But I know there's been a rash here recently. That's all they talk about is aliens, and the government knows there's aliens, but there are no aliens. Okay, they're demons masquerading as aliens, to trick you. That's their whole purpose, is to get your mind off of God and say, oh, well, I guess there is outer space and there's planets out there, way out there, and there's life on Mars, and no. Everything is right here. Everything is right here under the firmament, and it's demonic, just like the Bible tells you. Okay? So, anyway, she saw a spaceship, a demonic spaceship. We've got another one here called Driving Blind. That had to do with her and my sister. They were driving when she was trying to learn how to drive, my sister. And they went through an area down there by our house in a valley, and they both went totally blind for like 30 or 45 seconds. So they went through something, or something happened where everything went black, and they couldn't see anything. And neither one of them wanted to say anything. They thought it had just happened to them till it was all over. And then they realized between the two of them that they had both basically went completely blind, just jet black for like 30, 40 seconds. And were scared to death and then scared to drive. So that's weird, So we've also moved up into this, is moving up in time. I've got one called The Footsteps. And this, of course, like I said, these demons, demoniacs, as Peter Ruckman called them, these demoniacs, they followed her, and she would go fishing all the time, and then they would show up down at the river and walk back and forth behind her in the gravel, and they could hear footsteps all the time, but there's never anybody there. So we got a story about that. Incident at the river. That's another one where the wind came up. They got scared. They thought a storm was coming up, so they got in the pickup, and something grabbed a hold of the truck and started shaking it and rocking the truck. And, it wasn't just the wind. And on a side note of that, I've noticed that lots of times when people see Bigfoots, there's wind involved. Like the wind will come up, and all of a sudden there's this creature. So like I said, I believe it's demonic in nature. I talked to a guy on the phone the other day. We were going to do a podcast about some Bigfoots. He's a Bigfoot hunter or something like that. And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm hunting Bigfoots, and they see Bigfoot all the time. He believes they're real, a real flesh and blood animal. I just don't believe it. And then he went on to say that these Bigfoots can appear and disappear. They can cloak themselves. And I'm like, that's a perfect case, in my opinion, to tell you that they're not a real flesh and blood animal. A real flesh and blood animal cannot cloak itself and disappear like Predator, okay? The Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Predator, and disappear up in the trees. A real animal can't do that, okay? And we're not Star Trek here, like the Romulans who can cloak their spaceships and they just disappear. That's all sci-fi. Okay, down here on the real earth that we live, animals don't do that. Demons can, demoniacs, okay, devils of some kind, but not a hairy flesh and blood animal. So we've got another one, horses on the bridge. This is one where the bridge down from the house, you could hear horses walking back and forth, and there was nothing on it. So basically footsteps. Yeah. So we've got another one here called The Empty House. This one happened to me and a friend of mine named Dave. We actually went out riding a four-wheeler one evening. It was at night while my parents were out fishing. And we came back, and all the lights were on in the house, and all the doors and windows were open. Everything was on in the house, and everything was wide open. And it was locked when we left, and nobody came back. So that was kind of weird. Let's see here. I've got one called Tea Time. That actually has to do with my mother. Many years after I moved out, I would call her on the phone to check up on her about every night. And she drank tea a lot of tea. Anyway, she would go mix her tea up and put the spoon in the sink. She drank instant tea. Yeah, that stuff is nasty. Anyway, she would mix that stuff up, and she'd be sitting on the couch, and the spoon would be in the floor. So she would get up and go put the spoon back in the sink, and, 2 or 3 times, she would just finally say, "Fine, stay on the floor." So while I was talking to her on the phone, this spoon is getting thrown around the kitchen. Nobody's in the kitchen. She's alone. So I called it tea time because it seemed like every time she wanted to make tea, something, a demoniac, throws the spoon across the room. And she just got used to it. I mean, she had literally grown up with this stuff. And so in her older age, when she was pushing 60 years old, she just didn't care. There's stuff flying around the house, and she's like, whatever. I don't care. And that's the one I've got in here, the shattered window. They had actually went and piled some lumber up on one side of the house, some 2x4s. No storm, there's no bad weather, no nothing, nobody around. They're sitting there watching TV, and one of those 2x4s on the other side of the house busts through the window and lands in the house, as if it was thrown through the window. But there's nobody around, and it's on the opposite side of the house, and it's like, oh, well, one of the things busted a window. I mean, that's just the way they thought about it. Anyway, it follows up with a salvation message. So anyway, I wanted to just go over that. I don't want to spend too much time. It's already been almost 40 minutes, but that's this book, Haunting of Virginia Crim. If you're interested, it is on Amazon. Type in Kenny Williamson at the top of your search bar, and it will show up. I've got my other books on there too. But you can also go to kennywilliamson.com, which is one of my websites, and at the bottom it says Ministry Books, and this book is there. You can click on it. It just goes to Amazon. So that's about it. Yeah. The most important thing about this book, I think, is the very last one called The Salvation Message. I believe that if you're saved, these things can't get a hold of you like they did her and her family. And I as far as the curses go, I don't think they can do their curses. You can break those curses, if you want to call it a curse, by getting saved. And I also believe that we're winding down as far as time is concerned before you have the ability to get saved simply by grace. So if I were you, I would do that as soon as possible. I have some stuff on my website that talks about, how to get saved, ABCs of salvation. Of course, it's all matters of what you think and what's in your heart. It's not just, you can't just repeat, some prayer written down on a piece of paper and assume it's going to work. You have to actually believe it. And, so I believe you should get saved before it's too late. I think if you don't, well, the Bible only says there's 2 places you're going to go. It's either heaven or hell. And I know I sure wouldn't want to go to hell. So think about that. If you have any questions, email me. Get in touch with me from the websites. Truth Seekers 2012@gmail.com. You can get in touch with me there or either one of my websites, including itsflatbro.com. There's a contact form, and it goes right to my email. So anyway, thanks for listening. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah. If you like this, please share it. Please rate it on Spotify. We're hosted on Spotify now. This will be on YouTube. Please like it, share it. Check out the book. Check out the others. Thanks for listening. And until we meet again, God bless you.